Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Digital Leader Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Hosted by Dan Goodstein, president of IRPA AI, a professional association, media and peer research network, providing education, networking and advice to over 130,000 global members on automation, enterprise AI and digital transformation. We're live Wednesdays at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the audio recording is available wherever you get your podcasts. And now, here's your host, Dan Goodstein.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Goodstein, and today we're discussing, does Trump's new H-1B visa spell the end of U.S. offshoring? Plus headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. I'm joined today by Chris Surdak, senior IRPA AI analyst, award-winning author, and former White House Chief Transformation Office advisor. Also ran digital transformation at Gartner, AI practice at EY. And Chris, I'm going to start just listing the things that you don't do. It's faster. He's not a plumber. He doesn't do construction.
I've done.
Wait, I'm learning something.
I just replaced the faucet in my shower like 3 weeks ago.
Oh, I need a friend like you in my house, man. I just fired.
I didn't say I did it well, but I did it.
I just had to fire my handyman.
The new reggae beginning. It's awesome. I love it.
So, Chris, it was bound to happen, and I'm sure there's some other examples, but the bombshell last week was apparently our buddies at Deloitte produced a paper that was written by AI and got into a bunch of trouble. They have to it's the Australian group within Deloitte, according to the Associated Press. They're going to pay back part of that $500,000 fee to the Australian government because a bunch of the report was inaccurate and written by AI.
Well, having spent the majority of my 30-plus year career in and around the consulting industry, all I can say is I'm surprised it took this long, right? Literally being instructed through the course of my career, hey, take this old PowerPoint and do a global find and replace of this term for that term so that we can charge, $750,000 for the PowerPoint. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, it was kind of a matter of time. And this is getting a ton of play, like on LinkedIn and so forth. No big surprise. But this is also echoing what we've seen from the legal industry. I know like 2 weeks ago, I posted where some attorney in California filed an appeal with the state court where 21 of the 23 referred to cases as prior case law were all fake. And so, if you're not careful, it's inevitable that this is going to happen to you. And a lot of people aren't very careful in this business.
Yeah, and here's the problem, right? I mean, I think it was McKinsey we talked about a few weeks ago, kind of promoting and maybe bragging that they're going to create an AI-led, firm, a consulting firm. But, in my mind, AI was going to be the equalizer, the disruptor for smaller firms. And, the big four were going to be, hey, we're the big four. We still have all this institutional knowledge and experience. And, so if you're willing to pay these types of prices, at least selling, using the brand as a way of kind of, selling those big fees, then you see something like this and you're like, I don't even trust that I'm going to get that, perceived more value from you. Right.
So again, a third of a century working in and around the business, a lot of people thought that this level of consulting was labor arbitrage, and it wasn't. It was credibility arbitrage, right? So, I went to Ivy League school. I have engineering degrees, all this stuff. So where did the top talent from the top schools go to? They went to the big four. They went to this level of consulting firm because a Fortune 500 didn't want to pay what it took to hire that person. But strangely, they were willing to pay twice as much on an hourly basis to a consulting firm to hire that person. And that was this perception of credibility that that a McKinsey or a Boston Consulting Group or a Bain or an Accenture had. And you were paying a significant premium to get that credibility. To a certain extent, what we provided was plausible deniability to CEOs. I did it because McKinsey said so. And if we screwed up, it's McKinsey's fault, not mine. So if you're now flat out saying, well, we're using AI to generate the materials, the credibility arbitrage disappeared. It vanished, right? Because I can ask ChatGPT the same questions that the McKinsey partner can. And so I think this is one of those instances where the really smart guys didn't think this one through, and they literally chopped their legs out from under themselves.
The other, to me, big story that I don't think got as much play is, we talked about Sora, OpenAI's Sora 2 AI video generator last week, but what came out this past week is the Hollywood Motion Picture Association kind of going after them and calling for them to stamp out copyright infringement on this platform. The underscored part here is OpenAI initially came out and said that copyright holders would have to actively opt out of the platform. In other words, no copyright protection. We're just going to opt you in by default. And if there's a copyright concern, you have to go in there and opt out, obviously getting some pushback from the Motion Picture Association and others.
Dan, this has been standard business practice for about 18 years. A decade ago, I was doing workshops, just going through the end user license agreements for Facebook or whatever. This is standard practice. So for people to come out and be all offended now that, oh my gosh, when you use ChatGPT, they default to take everything off of your hard drive. No one should be surprised at this. This has been going on for ages. It's just it's so much more egregious at this point.
To come out and say like, we know it's a copyright infringement, but you have to, the burden is on you, Mr. Copyright holder. I mean, that part I think is unprecedented, at least to be so overt about it.
It's a multi-billion-dollar neener. It's like, what are you going to do to me? Right. Because I've already got your entire hard drive. I'm already listening on every call and every meeting that you have. I mean, you and I have tested it on this call over the course of the last couple of months. I mean, I mentioned something to one of our guests, and then a commercial for it shows up as soon as we log off the live show. Anybody that doesn't get that's why FANG is worth $15 trillion. So
yeah, I have a friend that's doing this thing now.
Neener that I think bugs people now.
My friend is going around just saying really embarrassing things in front of people's phones now, just to get certain things to pop up.
I had a funny post the other day on LinkedIn where I said, it shows these people driving around with a bullhorn out their car, and they're yelling out their car, hey Siri, play Coldplay. And so people, like, everybody's houses is starting to play Coldplay. I mean, it's the running joke, but again, I think why this bugs, particularly Hollywood, is it's the big neener, but it's also costing them billions and billions of dollars. And this is an industry that lives by copyright and the IP generation. So, it's going to be a heck of a battle, and what a time to be an intellectual property attorney.
Salesforce is dealing with ransom demands. Apparently, hackers got in through a SalesLoft drift app, according to Bloomberg, and they're saying they won't negotiate with terrorists. Essentially, they won't engage, negotiate, or pay the hackers. But this hacking group is sending extortion threats, claiming to have stolen 1 billion records from about 40 Salesforce clients.
And the more, generative AI is, without question, and a lot of cybersecurity people are saying this, it is the greatest single threat to information security that we could ever conceive of. And the problem is there's no way of understanding how vast the attack surface is now that we're doing agentic. As soon as you allow this thing to kind of start making decisions on its own with no concept of what the training material was, and in fact, the training material is so vast that there's no way you could possibly check it all. This is going to be commonplace, unfortunately. And that's great to say we're not going to go negotiate with terrorists, but if Salesforce has their entire shared instance of everybody's data blow up, that's kind of rough on the business model.
Yeah, and a familiar alarm for you. There was a report in NBC News, which is kind of tracking a bunch of analysts who were talking about the recent NVIDIA investment from OpenAI, $100 billion, and kind of warning that this kind of loop of investment money is too tight between OpenAI, Microsoft, Oracle, SoftBank, and CoreWeave, who we talked about last week. And so they're already drawing comparisons, as I know you have for a while, to the pre-2000.com dynamics, where just too much is being concentrated in a few areas.
And so there's a it's a little bit off-color joke about economists that I won't use, but I mean, GDP is how often the dollar bill changes hands, not what value is generated. So this is amazing for generating artificial revenue numbers for the business, but it's horrifying in terms of what is the actual value here. And it reminds me of the old Dr. Seuss cartoon, the star-bellied Sneetches, where like some of the Sneetches are running into the tattoo machine that puts a star on their belly, and then they immediately come out and they go to the next machine that takes the star off their belly. And the guy that runs the two machines is making all kinds of money, but nothing is actually changing. This is big time the star-bellied Sneetches cashing in, and it's very scary. Is there value there? I think so. I've recently interacted with some AIs that may have a glimmer of hope of adding some value, but I mean, we're a long way from justifying $4 trillion.
Interesting stuff. So let's get to the main topic, which is visas, Chris. I mean, you and I both go back. You I think even further than me, back to this era of the original outsourcing, offshoring model, and large companies in our business, especially the Indian, what was coined the Indian outsourcers, IT services and consulting companies in particular, who kind of leverage this H-1B visa system in the U.S. The Trump administration has come out in the last few weeks and said, hey, we're going to start charging $100,000 per, which is up from, I think it was what, 20 grand or something like that before. 10
I don't recall what the original amount was,
but pretty substantial. And the idea is to, in I think the Trump administration's opinion, close this loophole that's taking hurting U.S. Labor and bring jobs back to the U.S. Obviously, there's backlash from a bunch of different industries. The healthcare industry uses apparently a lot of these visas, but the one obviously that's relevant to us is the tech and consulting. There's Deloitte, you mentioned before. You have these major Indian outsourcing companies, Chinese outsourcing companies, but also up and coming startups in Europe, Eastern Europe and throughout the world, really, that have relied on this for entry into doing business in the U.S. And that's a very prohibitive number, $100,000 for that. So what do you think?
A range of thoughts on this. If I recall, he originally announced it was going to be also on renewals. So it wasn't just like new ones. It was for anybody that's renewing. And I believe they walked that back on the very first day that they announced this. So it was just net new H-1Bs. And I think, his intent was to make it on renewals too. But all of corporate America, rightfully so, screamed, "Oh my gosh, you're going to destroy us. At least give us some time to respond." and I've worked with offshoring for the better part of 20 years. I mean, I was at Dell in 2002, 2003 when we did our first India-based call center and was directly involved with that. And I've done multi-shore delivery for a quarter century. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for, I think what's interesting with H-1B is taking those resources that were originally in their own country and then bringing them to the US. It's you're always going to have this sort of internationalization of talent and so forth, but I think bringing them specifically to the US, onshoring an offshore resource does definitely bring, interesting challenges to what happens to the US labor force. I think young men, American men in their 20s or something currently have an unemployment rate of something over like 20%. And you always have to look at our unemployment numbers with the realization that after a year of unemployment, they kick you off the rolls as unemployed and just say, well, you're not employable or you're not trying. So the actual numbers of unemployed people of all ages in the US is vastly higher than is being reported. It's nowhere near the 5 or 6% that we claim. And so I think that we're bringing on, and then the other challenge is how many of these offshore positions are actually kind of fake. I personally know of a company that had hired someone that they thought was a work from home worker. And they noted after they hired him, they noticed that they were working really strange hours. So it was someone that claimed to be in the US and they had actually offshored their own work to this other individual in India that was actually pretending to be like 5 or 6 different workers. And that one person that they thought that they had hired domestically actually had like 5 or 6 different jobs in the US and just had farmed all their own work off to offshore. So, HR's got its work cut out for them trying to figure all this out.
Yeah. So so a couple of clarifications. You're right. They did update it. It's for any new petition filed after September 21st, 2025. And the top 3 industries affected are technology, healthcare, and higher education. That's the other area. But there's, I don't know. This is a big topic, right? There's part of me that feels like this would have been a good policy 20 years ago.
Yeah.
If you want to stop the globalization of talent, in certain sectors and promote U.S. jobs and all of that, and avoid essentially the offshoring outsourcing industry from happening in the first place, there's an argument to be made there. I think. I think the issue now is that ship has sailed, and the part of it that a lot of I try to avoid politics as much as possible here, but I think most politicians in general, regardless of left, right, they kind of ignore the fact that there's a huge gap between skills gap between the larger population in the US and what is needed. I mean, we know this from the RPA days when, the top 2 or 3 RPA firms started their own training programs to the tune of millions of dollars because they weren't getting US graduates who were, up to speed, up to par, and they couldn't hire fast enough. Right. So I think that, long term, maybe there's some value, but in the meantime, what happens, right? I mean, there's a report in Business Insider that said that it's actually going to create more offshoring and remote workers and things because it's becoming less advantageous to even do business in the U.S., not just because of the policies, but because of the volatility of the policies. So, what used to be something that was, these visas were something that were sought after and people would wave around with pride that they had these visas. Now it's like, I don't want to go to the US and work, and I don't want to do business in the US because it's getting too expensive and too complicated. And then what happens to the cost of services in the meantime?
And we see that all around us. The original intent of H-1B is for rare skills and particularly talented people to attract them to the US and bring that talent in here. A ton of the people on H-1Bs now are like truck drivers and stuff.
Hmm.
Or
You're saying there is abuses. There's definitely abuses.
Oh, without question. And so does it make sense to address that? I think, yeah, but you can't attack this with a sledgehammer, to your point. The time for that was 20 years ago. And you can't rip this Band-Aid off now and say, well, everybody's now, the cost of having them is going to go up by a factor of 5. There's no way we can do that. And so I think you need much more measured approaches, recognize, yeah, there are abuses, and start to wean us off where we've counted upon that. But at a minimum, he's a showman, love him or hate him. Trump is a TV star, and this made for great television. And hopefully it means that we're going to start addressing it more directly. Also, to your point about is the US even a viable market to operate in any longer? Well, if you de-employ 30% of our workforce in the US, then yeah, they're not going to be very good consumers anymore, are they? Consumer debt in the US is skyrocketing, college debt skyrocketing. So we're living on borrowed time across our entire population in the US. And to your point, a lot of people aren't adequately skilled. If someone gets a 4-year degree and they think 1 + 1 = broccoli because of what they were taught, they're probably not going to be very effective in the workforce. So we have to rethink what we are even teaching people today and what's actually meaningful. How about teach kids how to balance a checkbook, or even what a checkbook is? I took shop and home ec in junior high school. I think I'd be fired for suggesting it now. So, what are we teaching people?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. And the other part is that, and there's been a lot of talk over the years about, penalizing companies for using, I mean, at one point we talked about a robot tax. Remember the robot tax concept?
Oh, yeah.
Because you wanted to stop people from, losing their jobs to technology or losing their jobs to remote. But, we live in a digital world. What wasn't possible maybe at the beginning of outsourcing is kind of possible now. I mean, there's a lot of technology that you don't need a person sitting in the US for. So, what I think happens is, what suffers is customer service, customer experience, visibility. To your point about, I just hired somebody, are they a real person? That transparency and visibility goes away if I'm pushed to hire remote workers. I don't think you're going to be able to sell the idea of, hey, and this was also my issue with the manufacturing side of things, which I'm not an expert in, so I won't go too deep on. But, in the meantime, while you build all these factories, the price of goods is going to come up, right? And is that helping the economy? Is that helping the average American worker who's living, at or below the poverty line? But, even in the tech space, right, it's always been a race to zero, right? Outsourcing was always, hey, I want you to give us new stuff. I want you to innovate. I want you to constantly improve my processes, but I also want you to do it cheaper every single time. So,
yeah.
So what's going to happen when you make it more expensive? You decrease the margins. Work's going to go remote. It's going to go overseas. It's going to go remote, or it's going to go to, we used to talk about, offshoring, nearshoring, no-shoring, right? It's going to go to no-shoring. Let's get AI and bots to do the work instead of people anywhere.
And technology dislocating human labor has always been a thing. And there's no way around that. The Luddites that were, the loom unemployed, a huge percentage of the women who at that time in England, they spent their winters weaving, because they couldn't do anything else. And so you disemployed a vast number of women that worked in England when you implemented the loom. And that's why they went to smash the looms. So the challenge now is that when a technology would replace a segment of the human workforce, it used to take decades. And so you had time to adjust. Now we're talking, it takes months and there's no time to adjust. So, we roll out AI and we disemploy a few million call center people. And that's great because we save a lot of money, but you have to recognize that you're taking away the ability to consume what people are producing. right? So eventually you do kind of cut your own throat when you do this. And I think you touched upon the other thing, which I've been writing about for over a decade, and that is the more we automate stuff away, the more we're actually going to value actual human interaction. And you already see this a little bit when you call a call center and you're getting the robo call, and we all know that we're experiencing that now. You're literally willing to spend an extra bucks to talk to an actual human being. And have you gone through how many steps it takes to actually get a human on a phone? They're doing everything they can to prevent that from happening. But that means I'm going to value it even more. And that's inevitably what's going to happen here, is that people are going to be willing to pay an extreme premium potentially to have some actual human interaction with the organizations that we interact with.
Yeah.
So there's no easy answer. The problem is that the rate of change is accelerating beyond our ability to absorb it as individuals and as a society.
Well, I think the other problem is, and this is maybe contradictory to the goal. I mean, the stated goal has been, hey, we want the US to be a technology leader, an AI leader, which, I think might be the first time that I can remember a presidential administration making technology dominance a priority, at least in the last decade or two. But this may actually be counterintuitive, though, because what ends up happening is your competitive, your talent pool ends up elsewhere, right? And so now companies start hiring people that are, not in the US, and US competitiveness actually, goes down as a result. The other thing I saw, which was interesting, is the effect of this on innovation, right? I mean, a lot of the most innovative stuff happens, in startups, in smaller companies who have less of a ability to pay $100,000 fee. NVIDIA came out actually pretty quickly saying they're going to go ahead and pony up. I don't know if this was a political move or, a business move or both, but a company like NVIDIA can afford it, right? The startup out of Europe who may have the next best thing since sliced bread, $100,000 is a lot of money.
So at the risk of being controversial, when I look at NVIDIA, that's
You've
I
never
know, really.
about
I mean,
that
that's
before.
just performative, empathetic suicide. It's like I'm going to virtue signal that I'm so fabulous this way. But there is a very, I think I'm going to get the number wrong, but last week I read something like 70% of all of the students going to America's, and I emphasize America's, Ivy League schools are foreign nationals. Only 30% of the people, or I think it might even been 20%. Of the students currently enrolled in the Ivy League are Americans. And so your point, it's like, what are we investing in? China loves that we're teaching all their people all of our best thinking, but then they go back home. and I actually, just about 7 years ago, I was doing some consulting to the government of Colombia on exactly this, where the government of Colombia should sponsor Colombians to attend online schools, particularly in America, pay for that education, and then those people have an American education, but they stay in Colombia, and then they're working for American companies and patriating American income for the benefit of Colombia. It was a great strategy for them. It's not so fabulous for America. And so I understand the motivation. In many ways, I'm for it because we're a global community, but it really is a degree of this suicidal empathy. We're working so hard to be nice to everyone else that we're hurting ourselves as a result. And there's got to be a balance point somewhere in between. But if only 20% of people going to our best schools are Americans, you got to wonder if this is the best strategy.
Yeah. So a couple stats, and obviously it's early. Like, this was just enacted, and there's been some misconceptions. And as you indicate, there's a difference between Trump saying it and how it actually gets rolled out and executed outside of the media. But
really,
but it's so far, there's a couple stats that have come out. First of all, in 2025, more than 300,000 jobs were outsourced annually to offshore locations, according to Forrester, and about 85,000 H-1B visas were approved, but the volume is going up. So the H-1B job volume is like a 3-to-1, but the gap is widening. Forrester is also saying that the Indian IT companies are redirecting talent and resources to India, Eastern Europe, and Latin America, citing the high cost and bureaucracy associated with U.S. hiring. So you're starting to see some of these things play out. There's another stat, I think it was in the BBC article, that said that for every previous H-1B visa, at least 1 to 1.5 jobs are being created outside the U.S. So you're starting to see some of those numbers, at least short term.
Well, and there was, depending upon your source, there was a lot of reporting or no reporting. When Trump initially announced this, there was a panic buying of flights from India back to the U.S.
Saw that, yeah.
And it was because all of these H-1B visa holders who theoretically should be in the U.S. working, there were tens of thousands of them mysteriously all on vacation back in India at the same time. Must have been a great time to go on vacation in India. So like people were trying to fly back before the deadline in an absolute panic. Oh, so were they on vacation or were they actually living over there? And kind of, any system is going to have its gaps, and any system is going to have its gaps gamed. And so if nothing else, putting a little bit of a spotlight on this and saying, all right, we had the best of intentions when we implemented this. It was theoretically good for everybody, and for it down the road to not be quite so wonderful, and we had unintended consequences. Welcome to systems. And so, it's probably good that we're taking a look at it and see if it's meeting the original goals of the program. Are we really benefiting from it, both as individuals and as a nation? And maybe we need to rethink it a bit.
By the way, correct myself. The fee was originally $995. So
yeah, it was a big shift.
Big 10x, right? So even less than I thought. Bigger change than I thought. Yeah, we'll see, Chris. Like I said, I worry about anything that slows innovation, slows the ability. People forget that Google was a startup once, Microsoft was a startup once, right? So how does the next wave of innovation happen if you make things so prohibitive that it doesn't, or what's more realistically going to happen is it's going to propel a different destination to be the leader, which is counter to what I think many people are trying to do in the U.S.
I got my sunshine come through. I'm working with a very large, the majority of the people I'm working with right now are offshore too. They work very effectively from offshore, and they don't have to come to the US and compete for our resources and our housing and everything else. So it's interesting. We've been, as you said, we've been offshoring for decades, but this kind of reshoring, I guess you would call it. I'm getting a foreign resource and I'm making them come to the US. That may be not the best approach, and it's interesting to see what will happen, but I expect disruption, of course. But I think there's a lot to be said for reviewing it and seeing, did it meet the original goals, and is it potentially being abused? Time will tell.
Or is it just, negotiation leverage, like some of the tariff stuff to get people to the table and cozy up deals, like I said, that NVIDIA thing, maybe that was, a posture for NVIDIA, make sure that none of their stuff gets canceled because China's canceling them, right? So, let's pony up with the U.S.
Trump wrote his book, Art of the Deal, in something like 1988 when I started college. So if anybody is mystified by what he's doing, he's been telling us what he was going to do for the better part of like 35 years. So none of this should come as a surprise.
I always say that. Yeah, I always say that. Again,
like him or hate him. Did this. He wrote about it in the mid 1980s. He's not a mystery.
He telegraphed all these punches, as they say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah. So and we haven't even we talked about innovation, but we haven't even talked about AI. Like if all of a sudden you have to do more with less, and you're sitting in the US, Do you hire a bunch of people, or do you do what I do every 30 days and sit down and figure out what I can have AI do that I used to have humans do? Right. I think that's the other, kind of existential threat
Well,
here is, we've already been on this path of, if you take, pre 2000, pre 2020, pre pandemic, where I felt as if there were a significant amount of jobs in the workforce that didn't need to be done by humans anymore, but were continuing to be because of the PR concern with letting people go, and the shareholder concerns, and the labor, department concern, right? And then the pandemic happens and people don't want to work or can't work, or what have you. And so companies have their excuse now to, use technology to do those jobs, to, force people back to the office in order to, create, people leaving and reduce the workforce. And then you have the AI thing, obviously changing the workforce. And then you add this to it, right? To say, hey, it's why would you hire? Why would you hire?
Well, and we're as yet the next iteration of labor arbitrage. We're looking at AI as this unshoring, right? We're just going to not employ anybody. And that sounds amazing for your cost basis as a company. Guess what? It's horrifying for you on the revenue side, because if no humans are earning anything, who the heck's going to buy your products or services?
Right.
And I saw a thing the other day where the typical purchasing power of a high school graduate in America has fallen by a factor of 10 since 1970. Not by 10%, by a factor of 10. And so the average age of buying a house now, and first time buyer of a house is like 39, where it used to be in the low 20s back in 1970. We have defunded the consumption by Americans by a vast amount. Now, part of that's inflation, where you just endlessly print dollars, so a dollar is basically worthless. But it's also by this constantly manipulating the supply of labor, which is great. You lower your costs, but eventually no one has any money to spend on the stuff that you're trying to sell. So again, it's a little bit of this, suicidal strategy of, I'm going to cost cut my way to greatness. Eventually there's nothing to sell and there's no one to buy. So, careful what you wish for, and these unintended consequences keep building up over time. And I, we're going to have to pay this check at some point.
Well, and I remember reading this interview during the beginning of the tariff, debate. And I forget who it was, but it was a company in Asia, I think. And they basically said, like, listen, we're not going to stop doing business with the US, but we're going to sell less there. So instead of putting 37 products in US markets, we're going to pick our top 2 products, and that's it, right? So less array, less assortment for the US. So I wonder what the IT industry version of that would potentially be.
It'll manifest some way. By the same token, do we really need 432 different kinds of mustard?
Yes, Chris. That's the luxury of being an American. And by the way, people are never happy, right? You go down the cereal aisle, exactly. and you're like, they don't have that cereal that I heard.
They had gummy bear flavored Oreos like 4 months ago. I was dumb enough to buy it because I had to try it, but am I going to buy it a second time? No. So, novelty is great up to a point, but then, do we really need this many choices, or does it make us all crazy? And I would argue there's a strong argument for the latter.
I remember a buddy of mine who I worked with in Italy, telling me, like, we don't have grocery supermarkets the way we have grocery stores, and it's fresh, whatever, but they don't have, like, it's not a giant warehouse like it is in the US.
I had a roommate who was from New Zealand. He worked for the New Zealand Lamb Company, and his girlfriend came to visit us in the US for like a couple of weeks. And I'll never forget I come home from work and she was sitting on the couch crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, my boyfriend asked me to go pick up some groceries and he wanted peanut butter. And I went to the store and there were so many choices of peanut butter. I didn't know what to do. She went back to our house and was crying because she had too many choices. It's not necessarily healthy. We're not good at dealing with that.
Yeah, something about simplicity, right? Simplicity is the path to happiness. Chris, always a pleasure, buddy. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, if you need help with anything, please reach out to us. We've got a team of experts waiting for your call, waiting to help out, or at least point you in the right direction, connect you with others from our global network. So go to IRPAai.org for more information. And in the meantime, have a great week, Chris. Don't get outsourced.
It's probably too late, but I'll try. Good to see you again.
Everybody. Bye-bye.